why this deception is still in place and why there are enablers continuously being recruited, you know, to perpetuate this deception, which is critical for our enslavement. So you are one of our finest brains. You remember I told you you are the last historian standing. When Mola passed away, and when Dr. Yombang passed away, I felt really sad. We had some differences, but these were living encyclopedias that, you know, their presence alone was an historical fact which could not be altered. And their passing away leaves us wanting. As I said to you, who is going to bless Ambazonia once we take it over? Who is going to help? Yes, because the generation we see today are mostly politicians. So who are the godfathers? Who are the statesmen remaining to bless our nation and to emblematize what we stand for and what we have for, and to knowledge of where they are coming from and where they are headed to.
Actually, you see, what you just described is the nature of all colonial occupiers and oppressors. The very idea which the colonial oppressor cannot stand is that the colonized can assert himself, the colonized people can assert their identity and set their own agenda. And so all colonial powers, all oppressors, whether they be white or black, have always set up and set out to make sure that the colonized people do not know their history, do not stand up for their rights, and do not challenge the oppressive status quo. And in that agenda, always they have enablers. Always. Read the history of any liberation movement on this continent or in Asia. It's exactly the same. And all of them use exactly the same language. It's amazing when you look at this whole thing. The colonial authority always claim that the oppressed is what? They tell you the oppressed are challenging law and order. The oppressed are terrorists, and deal with them as you want. Check out. Everybody talks about Mandela, known that the South African apartheid system characterized him as a terrorist. Everybody knows that. Mugabe was a terrorist. Everybody knows that. The Cuban leader was a terrorist. Mao Zedong was every liberation movement that challenges the colonial oppressor. They're always. And that's the commonality you find amongst all colonial oppressors. The language is exactly the same. The modus operandi is exactly the same. And that modus operandi is always to use force. In the false belief that they have monopoly of force. And when I heard one, I don't know what to describe him, some fellow across the Mungo there. Half education is a very bad thing. He parrots. It says the state has the monopoly of force. I'm sure he just looked at some picked that thing somewhere and started parroting it. But actually what Max Weber did say, that the state has monopoly, legitimate use of force. That word legitimate is very, very critical. But of course, our individual, I suppose he doesn't know what legitimate means, and he doesn't understand the nuance in all of that. So what has always impressed me, even in our own struggle, is to discover that the colonial oppressor align himself exactly with all colonial oppressors. And that's why I've been saying that this continent has not completely gotten rid of colonialism. The UN is clear, and the instrument of the African Continental Organization is very clear that colonialism in all its forms, shape, and manifestation must be eradicated from the continent. And that's the UN agenda as well, must be eradicated. So the fact that you find the white man packed his bags and went away doesn't mean that colonialism ended on this continent. It hasn't. We have a living example in the Ambazonian case. We have a living example in the Richian case. We have a living example in the Western Sahara case. Black on black colonization. Because some neighboring country thinks it has a bigger size, a bigger population, and a presumed military power can turn around and grab the territory next door. History has shown that it doesn't work. It can never happen. Just as South Africa failed to grab Namibia, just as Eritrea, Indonesia failed to grab East Timor, just as Imperial Ethiopia failed to grab Eritrea. These are living examples. Morocco has been strong for the past half century, thinking that it can succeed and grab the Western Sahara. It will never succeed. But more countries that are wise enough, when they see a situation like this, they say, okay, fine. And that's what Indonesia did. So look, what we are doing here is not achievable. And they left. And my advice to the colonial, our own colonial oppressor has always been, please, read history. Read history. And you'll find out that you will never succeed in your expansionism in the next 1,000 years. It will never happen. So here we are, facing, we'll be discussing one of the biggest historical frauds that has ever been recorded on this continent. What passes for as 20th May, and the colonial oppressor keeps on trying to ram it down people's throat. That that was something that was legally, legitimately, and even politically well done. No, on no count, even on political level. No talk of legally. It was a gigantic fraud, a big swindle. And in the course of this conversation, we shall pick out elements of that and other issues that are linked to all this fraud that is being committed by our colonial oppressor.
That's wonderful, Prof. When you talk about the necessity to eradicate, colonialism from within the continent, and the fact that the white people packed their bags and left, does not in any way symbolize the end of colonialism. When I was doing research on the issue of the 20th May, one of the most outstanding issues which I found was the interest of France. Do not forget, even though we are talking about 20 May as a component of the illegal presence of an alien system, it is important for us to dissect it as a standalone component. We know from 1961 that the moment the occupier marshaled its forces into our homeland, it basically entrenched itself as a colonial power, and anything it did, was based on colonialism. Now, but one of the most important things I found in researching this topic was a visit, I think in February 1971, by then President Pompidou. And Pompidou, for him, it was critical following the accord between Cameroon and France and other Francophone African countries, which was premised on commercial ties, military ties, monetary ties, and otherwise, that the Cameroon as a state remains Francophone. And that despite the fact that Cameroon had rolled its tongues into Ambazonia and effectively taken over our country, they were not satisfied that the notion of perception of Anglo-Saxonism was not totally eradicated, and that the imposed federalism of 1st October 1961 still gave a semblance of the existence of an Anglo-Saxon component which must be dealt with. And Pompidou's visit in 1971, as narrated by Samuel Eboa, who was a close aide to Mr. Ahijo, he said that to Foncha, that the aim of Pompidou's visit was to put an end of the notion of federalism that still gave the perception of the existence of an Anglo-Saxon entity. And as we've taken note, Pompidou, the moment he left, Ahijo engaged in a tour of our territory, visiting our fonts, including the Abombis, the Gallagher's, and the Fonum Saw, and trying to sell to them the notion of the burdensome nature of federalism to the notion of progress. And he had an enabler. The enabler who was perpetuating that psychophonic narrative with him was S.T. Muna. And he got compensated immediately after the referendum with the post of head boy of their parliament. And he stayed there for 15 years, perpetuating the notion of a one Cameroon. So it is very important for our people to know the desire of Cameroon. And that is also reflected in, if you listen to the language in any video of Cameroon's military presence in our homeland is French. Immediately after the referendum and the institutionalization of a supposed unitary state, they made sure that, the Francophonization agenda, went unperturbed, and that Cameroon became known as a French country in order to safeguard the Franco-Cameroon alliance. And that is very critical for, we will look into the illegality of, their presence, their encroachment in 1961, but it's critical that you inject some input on the notion of the 20th of May.
Thank you. Let me take a step backwards. You raised some very, very salient historical point there about the military occupation of the Southern Cameroons. I'll give a little bit of history. Of course, people tend to look at it and say, well, it is French Cameroon troops. But when you forget that, what people tend to forget is that these were troops led by French officers. They were led by French officers. It was only late in the 70s that French Cameroon was able to have their own officers leading their military, but they've all been controlled by France. And the question that people have always asked, and they've asked me, how come the Southern Cameroons allowed French Cameroon to militarily take over? Many people don't know that the Southern Cameroon never had an army. The British never had an army, never raised an army, even though the UN documents, trusteeship agreements permitted the British to be able to raise an army in the Southern Cameroons. The British attitude, which is what has followed us throughout, very convenient for the British. After administering us together with Nigeria, what the British simply did was, they told the UN, well, if there's going to be any trouble in the Southern Cameroons, we'll bring in troops from Nigeria. And that's what they were doing. They brought in troops whenever there was trouble. Remember the Balewudukum War? They brought in Nigerian troops there to quell the whole thing. Whenever there was a problem, the whole drove of Nigerian policemen who came into the Southern Cameroons and stayed. And this issue was very, very critical for the Southern Cameroon political leadership. And when they had the tripartite meeting in May 1961, there was a contentious issue there. And the Southern Cameroon political leadership didn't make it clear to the British that they are bent on ensuring that the Southern Cameroons raise its own army and maintain its own army. What they simply asked the British was for assistance to achieve this. You know the British characteristic answer. The British said, we have no money to spend on you guys. Now, the Southern Cameroons, Joan the rest, they said, okay, fine. They were prepared to go to Germany and seek help from Germany to raise an army. The British blocked that endeavor and insisted that security in the Southern Cameroons was going to be maintained by troops from French Cameroon and the police from French Cameroon. This was so distressing, so distressing. And the Southern Cameroon delegation at that tripartite meeting in May in Boya, it was held in Boya, said, how can we allow foreign troops to come into our territory? It's like an occupation. We'll be occupied. The British said they didn't see it that way. And they wrangled on that topic for a long time until Ahijo said, well, okay, what they were going to do, and this is part of Ahijo's deception. Ahijo was raised a very deceptive man. He lived a very deceptive political life, and he died in deception. He said, well, we're going to bring the Southern Cameroon officers and soldiers who are serving the Nigerian army. And he tried to sugarcoat it by saying they should come back to the fatherland and serve the fatherland. And people said, but these are people brought up in the English tradition. They are going to come, okay, are they going to come to constitute an army in the Southern Cameroons? He said, no. They were going to come and they were going to join their brothers in Yaoundé. And the two will constitute what he called a federal bilingual army. Can you ever hear of a thing like that? A federal bilingual army. But our own leadership was not smart enough. I think they should have stuck to their gun and said, no, we will not let this happen. And they allowed that, Ahijo to deceive them. That the Tatos, the Anagos, and the Quentis, and all of this were going to come. And they will form, with French Cameroon, a federal bilingual army. That word bilingual has always been used to deceive the world. But actually, like you correctly pointed out, one, everybody knows that French Cameroon army is a French army. They speak the language there is French, and it's French trained. The weapons they use are from France. It's recently that they've started diversifying the source of the weapons. So the issue about security was very, very important. Was raised, and the deception was practiced on our people and claimed that they were going to federal bilingual army. And each Southern Cameroon who joined the military there, we know, were bound to speak French, and it's French. Just like their police is all French. Everything is French, you know. And that's why, as far as the world is concerned, even up to today, I've traveled around the world. When I meet people and I speak English, of course, they look at my passport. Unfortunately, recently in Cameroon, and I speak English, and everybody says, how come you speak English? Then they say, no, as far as we're concerned, that's a French-speaking country. And then you start now a whole long history trying to explain and so on and so forth. And French Cameroon itself has done nothing to remove that misconception or what. In fact, I've done everything to impress onto the world that French-speaking. Go to every embassy. They find the language is French. What's the issue art is in French. When you have some Southern Camerooners serving there in some capacity, they are forced to express themselves and write in French. You don't do that, you don't get along. So that is part of the colonial agenda of France. That is a part of the colonial agenda of French Cameroon. And you correctly mentioned, indeed in 1971, Pompidou landed in Yaoundé. Pompidou was in Yaoundé to impress it on Ahijo that, look, it is, remember, this France-Afrique thing didn't just start today. Elf had discovered oil in the Southern Cameroons and had been insisting that the Southern Cameroon must be taken over, because if they don't take it over, then French Cameroon would not be able to control the resources. And to convince Ahijo, they told Ahijo, look at what is happening in Nigeria. Do you know why there's Biafra? There's Biafra because of the oil issue equation. So if you don't take these people, that's what is going to happen to you as well. And Pompidou came after the elf had told him all of this, and he came to impress on his people that, look, we've been waiting for you to do this thing all this time, haven't. Time has come. Please, go ahead. And I say this with knowledge because, interestingly, recently in 1971, Ahijo was defending federalism. Very, very interesting. And was insulting many of the French Cameroon so-called intellectuals and politicians who were insisting what they call there should be unity, and that federalism and a federal state was not a mark of unity. That Ahijo must do something about it, abolish it. And Ahijo turned and asked them. He said, this is rubbish people are talking. Look at federal states in the world. Are you saying there's no unity in Germany? Are you saying there's no unity in the United States of America? So what are you guys saying that federalism does not reflect unity? And so on. As recently as 1961, Ahijo was 71, Ahijo was saying that, defending federalism. And how did that come about? There was a Southern Cameroon journalist. Because by 1965, there were rumors going around that the Southern Cameroon, or West Cameroon, they call it in those days, was bent on seceding, leaving the whole arrangement, because already we were fed up. We have intelligence report that Ahijo's field operatives in Boya were filing to Ahijo, and they were telling him, sir, there's unrest here, that people are comparing the Southern Cameroon to Gabon, and saying, if Gabon can be a sovereign state, why can Southern Cameroon be a sovereign state? Complaining that the Southern Cameroon has become a colony of French. I'm talking about 1965. And right at that time even, and this is an intelligence report, they are there, that what they call a rapport trimestriel, which will be filed from Boya to Yaoundé, and saying that there's a plot in the Southern Cameroons to secede and to call that country Ambazonia. I'm saying this because many people think that this Ambazonia business is just yesterday that came out. No. It has been there, right in Boya. So Ahijo, in spite of all of this, was defending, and all of a sudden Pompidou landed to press the button. And then overnight, Ahijo became a different story, speaking a different language. And for the record, they tried to turn it around and give the impression that it is, and this is what some enablers who pass for historian have been saying, that it is the people of West Cameroon or the Southern Cameroons who told Ahijo to abolish the federation and institute a despotic unitary system. And the name that was mentioned, and he said Nzo Aki is the one who suggested the idea, or who told Ahijo. And I'm saying, since when did any politician in the Southern Cameroon start instructing Ahijo to do something, and Ahijo will do that thing? So it's very, very strange. But Ahijo, after Pompidou left, started speaking a different language, but pretending that he's not interested in all of that. Because when, according to these accounts, Nzo Aki told him, Ahijo is reported to have said, well, you do that after me. But Ahijo, that's precisely what Ahijo was doing. And just to finish it a little bit, after Pompidou left, a conspiracy was hatched, a plot. There were 5 conspirators in that plot who plotted how to go about this, the assassination of the Federation. Ahijo, one of the conspirators, Sengaku, one of the conspirators, Charles Wana Anana was another conspirator, and of course, inevitably, this Paul Biya we are talking today was one of the conspirators as well. And finally, the 5th one was Musa Yaya Saki Fada. These 5 people were involved in that conspiracy to murder the Federation. It was a real conspiracy, and Ahijo was at the hub. And you see from it, there were 2 Nordists, two Bulu Beti people. Paul Senghor was brought in because he was a speechwriter, writing speeches and so on and so forth, and was Deputy Secretary General then. But otherwise, it was a Beti Nordis arrangement thing, and they had to get rid of the Southern Cameroons and formally annex, because they have been in control since 61 October, but now they have to formalize it by annexing it formally. And these conspirators then went about this whole business. And later, of course, you had Osman May, who was the federal inspector on Garo, in charge of the whole North. And then they drafted a constitution, got in Maurice Duverger, a Frenchman, his constitutional lawyer, and asked him to really look at it and correct, do everything and so on. And that's a document Ahijo pulled out and said that was his May 20th constitution, which he had prepared and pulled out. But we'll talk more about some of these details.
Thanks a lot, Prof. You've raised a lot of interesting issues, and I would just like to add on the issue of Pompidou and Ahijo, because you talked about Ahijo had being the champion of federalism as having of stability, or what they call his one exceptional notion of Cameroon. We must also recall that before Pompidou arrived in February, Jacques Foccart had been pushing for the execution of the UPC nationalists, what we should term Cameroon nationalism, to give Ahijo the possibility of hijacking the notion of reunification. Because the notion of reunification was actually being championed by the UPC and its leadership. Why the Ahijo axis was being seen as a puppet of the French system. You, as a strong constitutional lawyer, you recall that Cameroon's constitution is something of, I think, the fourth of the French Republic. It's a replication of the constitution of the fourth French Republic. It was designed and instituted to perpetuate Frenchness within Cameroon. And in January, why they commuted the death sentence of some UPCs. The champions of the UPCs, like Mr. Wangi, was executed a few weeks before Mr. Pompidou came in. And what then happened was, Ahijo then hijacked the notion of the reunification of Cameroon and pushing forward with his agenda to undermine the very premise of his own 1961 constitution, the premise of Article 47, which he used, I think, then Article 1 to override the premise of Article 47. Now, another issue I need Ambazonians to look into is, you talked about two issues, the notion of an army and that of leadership. What puzzles me, and I'll be raising a question with you, because you have been at the forefront of the erection of every anti-colonial structure. One moment, Prof. Let me decline the call. You have been at the forefront of the erection of every anti-colonial structure since the fall of the Berlin Wall, in instituting the SDF, in being the one that convened the All Anglophone conferences, and being the lead person in drafting the constitutional proposal that was, refused because of the so-called large. But I will come to that, because the issue of leadership is critical. We are talking here about Ahijo. We are talking about Ahijo, a guy from the north with less wit than people like the Joas, the Fonlons, and all other Ambazonian leadership.
Yep.
To have been able to manipulate, Ambazonia by refusing to implement the premise of 1608, putting in place a constitution, transforming their constitution from La Constitution to La Constitution Fédérale, imposing it on Ambazonia, dismantling every socio-economic and political institution that empowered us, and this is the worst part of it, a multi-party democracy, the first democracy within the continent that had ensured transition of power from one prime minister to the other, was manipulated to dismantling all political parties in I think 1965. And so leadership in 1966, right? Leadership has been a big problem for Ambazonia. Either they have been naive or they have been recruited as historical revisionists, enablers to perpetuate, the dogma of the Cameroon system. Because I cannot understand how a leadership that walk out of the Eastern House of Assembly and set up office in their own capital without firing a shot could allow itself not to think about instituting a kind of a defense mechanism to protect our institutions, our people, and our independence. And how can this particular leadership, how could they have been unable, to understand the machination of the French? And I'm very grateful for this generation, and I'm grateful for the fact that we have been, as you talked about the leaders wanting to go to Germany to seek help. Was the same one that was, trying as much as possible to undermine self-determination within Ambazonia. But what is important for me is the departure from that naive leadership in the past. I know some of them put up a fight. But as we can see within the context of our struggle in the past 30 years that we have been involved in, what has failed us woefully has been that of leadership. An intellectual like yourself, you are a man of brimstone. You are somebody from the onset has believed in the right of Ambazonians to defend themselves. And how it became possible that after setting up the SDF, you people transferred it over to Mr. John Frundi. It's puzzling. And that, Prof, it's not a laughable matter. Just come to think about it.
People have made that point. Yes, it's true. You're right.
You remember I called you a couple of years ago when I did an interview with you, and I said, you've been described as a reluctant general.
Yes.
How is it possible that you, Contant Elat, they're now passing around for historical enabler and Tuewu ran away? How could you set up, the foundation of Ambazonian consciousness, and you handed it over to Barrister Contant Elat?
I laugh because actually you raise so many issues, very pertinent, salient issues, very salient, and I think you are spot on when you say that Ejo himself didn't have much of original ideas. Actually, even just like the present octogenarian has no ideas of his own. But Ahijo, you are right. Ahijo, the two things that Ahijo later on claimed that they were were never his. The idea of what they keep on calling a reunification was forced down his throat by UPC. You correctly made that remark. That's very true. And he reluctantly took on that. The other idea too, and many people don't say this a lot, the Southern Cameroon forced federalism down his throat. He was a very reluctant recipient of federalism. But the French advised him to accept it as a bait, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
As a bait, as a way of capturing the Southern Cameroons. Because how could you explain Here is French Cameroon. They talk so much about their sovereignty and so on. And they had sovereignty, assuming the French gave them that sovereignty. They had sovereignty. And barely a year and a half later, they were prepared to forego that sovereignty and assume the lesser status of a mere federated state at the same level with this thing. So that was a bait, a strategy to, like as we say in pidgin, you take corn, you throw a fowl, you can chop, you know. And so he knew very well, and the French advised him, if you do not accept the federalism which French is talking about, they will go to Nigeria, you lose, they will have nothing. So he reluctantly accepted. So he accepted federalism, rammed down his throat. He accepted reunification, rammed down his throat. And as for federalism, which was rammed down his throat, he then decided, after the French have talked to him, said, look, yes, you're a good boy, you've done what you're supposed to do. Now undo that federalism and go back to what we know. And still they're going back, you know. And I've always told people, look, there is no single instance in world history where if federalism has failed, it has been supplanted by a unitary system. There's none. There's no one example, but that one did not even survive for long. And that was the case of Adolf Hitler, when in 1934, he changed German federalism, become a unity state under him. But we know what happened. Immediately after the war, the Germans lost no time and they reinstated the federal system. Now, check out history. There is no other instance where a unity system has successfully supplanted a federal system. And wherever federalism has failed, what always happens is the whole system has collapsed. The component unit has set their individuality. Check out history. Not only here. Check out Latin America. Check out in Asia. Africa, Europe, it has been the same thing. So this idea that French Cameroon could fraud a unitary system and impose on a federal system after it says it was not working is just not on. And I want to say, we are saying this not just for a record, of course, for historical record, because we, like the Jews in Israel, we have since left. The Jews in Egypt. We have since left Egypt. We had crossed the Red Sea. Moses has struck the sea. We cross over. I will never go back. That is clear. But we are saying this thing now for purposes for the record, so that history can record. And secondly, to show that they shouldn't think that we are stupid and that we don't know. We know or we knew what happened. The fundamental question you ask about leadership: how come our people allow themselves to be manipulated by these people? I've tried to figure out why. Two things. One, our people spend so much time and energy fighting the British to get out of Nigeria. A lot of effort and energy was expended on that. The meetings in Nigeria, meetings in the UK, and so on, trying to extricate us from Nigeria. And even after we left in 1954, as far as the arrangement was concerned, we were still part of Nigeria. Until 1960, when Nigeria achieved independence. So our people spend, that is a lot of time, a lot of energy. And because of that, Nigeria became the referent. All our people. That's where they cut the political teeth. That's where they had their education. That is where some of them got married. That's where they interacted. Nigeria, and Nigeria for them was the example. Even for the intellectual mention, even Fallon. He brought up in Nigeria. All the Norman Goose are talking about, all these are big intellectuals. All of them. Young one, all of Nigeria. So our people were never exposed. They were never exposed to the world. And like the American Consul General remarked, that our people, the leadership, mainly leaders, which in itself is nothing, because Hejo was just a primary school graduate. And the biggest job ever had was a postmaster. So that was a Hejo district. So I don't think that in itself. But the point is that they were not exposed to the rest of the world. Their highest district was Nigeria. That's what they all referring to, Nigeria. And when, of course, they went for constitutional meetings in London and the UK, they only go for a day or two. And know those meetings. You get in the plane, you come, they take you into a hotel. 10 minutes after, I take you back. There was no interaction with other UK MPs or political leaders or intellectuals. Nothing. Not one of our politicians in Boya could take a phone call and call somebody in the UK, a minister there, or an intellectual there. Nothing. Not one. So there was that very serious limitation of our people. Now, when they turned over, not turned out to French Cameroon, there was a different experiment at all. And that's another thing that killed us. Naivety, born out of being too trusting. They believed when French Cameroon come and tell lies as the oligarchs are telling, fraud, they took them at face value. They didn't question. They didn't look behind to say, no, what do people mean? They took them, but later on, then at their own expense, that they have been taken for a ride. These two things, in my view, contributed very, very seriously to the leadership which we had. They would have still put up a very good fight if the British didn't lay them down this path with Nigeria thing and so on. They would still have done if we didn't have this culture of believing. And part of it, of course, is due to religion. There are two religious branches. Our politicians were either Catholic or the Protestant. And the leadership at first, Foncha was Catholic. Joe was Catholic. The only person who was not Catholic was Muna. And that is why, and that's part of the reason why he was able to get on with the Hejo. Because, going back to the history of UPC, Ahijo and the Catholics were always at loggerheads. Because UPC, this thing were actually at the Roman Catholics who are at the forefront. Bebe Yedi and all of those guys, Mahima Tipa. They were not Protestants. They were essentially Catholics. And the Archdiocese then in Yaoundé, the Archbishop, was giving Ahijo headache. So Ahijo had no love lost for Catholics. None at all. Killing the Muslim didn't mean anything, or any Roman Catholic. And so he was more aligned to people like the Protestantism, Mona, for example. And that, when you look at all of this, explaining the way our people found themselves in, and of course, the last element is our people, at some point, they cracked and stopped thinking together and acting together. They will start each man for himself, God for us, and the devil takes the hindmost. That's what happened. Muna fighting his survival, Foncha fighting his own survival, Endele for his own, and so on and so forth. Mutual accusation and blame. Either it's graphic people are taking this, or the coastal people are taking this, and so on and so forth. And there was no time when our people said, look, we have a common adversary, let me call the enemy, in French Cameroon. We've been brought up in a tradition of multi-party politics. Why would we accept a one-party system? But our people willingly accepted one-party system because Ahijo was able to dangle a carrot. If you come along, this is what is going to happen. And kept on this phony notion of what he called national unity. And remember, whenever French Cameroon talks about unity, they are thinking of grabbing and absorbing the Southern Cameroons. Unity doesn't mean that there's secure unity within French Cameroon. After all, French Cameroon was in fractions. They were killing each other. They were divided. They've never talked about unity amongst themselves there. But whenever I hear the word unity, what they mean was they are talking about capturing West Cameroon or the Southern Cameroon. So that's their concept of unity. That's their concept. And even up to today, that's what they mean when they talk about it. It's like using the word bilingualism. What is bilingualism? They tell you, oh, what they're doing is they're trying to do what they call Anglophones a favor. by writing something in some funny English, and they call that bilingualism. And they say Cameroon is a bilingual nation. Go to Senegal, you see the practice of bilingualism. You get on the street, for 4 people meet, 3 will be speaking to you English and French. In Senegal, which is 100% a French-speaking country. So what rubbish are they talking about bilingualism in Cameroon? Go and see, and I've met many of these guys internationally, Senegalese. They will talk to you in French and they talk to you in English. They see our own so-called bilingual Cameroon people. Go and meet them. They will tell parlez-moi en français. Mais vous savez, mais nous, and they start going on and on and on and on. These are concepts that were used to bamboozle our people. And then finally, this thing about the SDF. How come? This is one of the sad memories. I mean, and as perhaps one of the few living people, I think, if just me and Frundi, unfortunately, the rest have since transitioned. When you had people like late Asanga, Siga Asanga, I was a professor there in the Faculty of Letters in Yaoundé. Myself, Ngwa Siri, and so on. You say we're educated people. It's a Justice Nyowakai. How come? Frundi took over. Well, what happened at that time, and that is the excuse which we gave and cannot give, that the only free agent at that time was who? Was Frundi. All of us were still in the employ of the government of Yaoundé. And for some people like Mr. Justin Yowakai, a judge, Supreme Court judge, could not be seen do anything. And anybody who knows the way the French Cameroon system operates would know. So we agreed that, well, we will not be at the forefront. He would take the leadership. But that leadership was going to be constrained by us, especially Siga Asanga, who became the secretary, and those of us who were going to provide legal guidance from behind and so on. But if you read history, people hardly reckon with this. That sometimes you look at an individual, you think, okay, this person is somebody you can put here and you will listen to advice, he will listen to this and so on. But the person gets in there and becomes his own person and grows wings. And you talk at that time, you turn around and tell I'm sacking you and all that and so on because you give him power. There are many instances in the world like that. Hitler came to power through that means as well. Before people realized he had become a monster, you know. And so that is what happened. That's what happened with us. And by the time we thought we could do a change and so on, he had entrenched himself and got the Bamileke alliance with him and so on. And that became very, very difficult. And I do remember very well those early days. We fought, even to impress on them, that we needed a federal structure to federalism. I remember at the first two Congress of the LGF, these issues were argued and argued and argued. And these Francophone guys would look at us straight in the face and tell us, we don't want to hear that nonsense about federation. There is secession. These are people who have been parachuted into the party. And they were telling us that. They look at us straight in the face and abusing us and telling us, we want to hear that nonsense about federalism. This past is gone. We don't want to hear about it. And for me, when I absorb things like that, I internalize them and I then say, oh, so it means these people really, they're incurable and there's nothing you can do about it. They're irredeemable. And from that moment, I said, we must fight a federal cause, move on onto AAC, that one must be. And when we crossed the Rubicon by saying, when we went to Bamenda, if they refuse within a reasonable time to accept, we have no choice but to revive our statehood and state it. And I've stuck to that. I'm logical with myself, you know. And reasonable time, after so many years, you can't say that reasonable time will not come. And so we did what we think was correct, and that was correct. historically, and even legally.
Thanks a lot. Well, I am I am I am really excited because I talk about this generation, including all of us, what we are doing at this particular moment. They, if you look back at historical periods, whether it was 1961, whether it was the plebiscite, non-implementation of 1608, Fumban, and then the takeover of our territory in 1972, all of these periods, right up to the period of even the AAC, Cameroon has been very excellent in using due processes to legalize on the entrenchment of its occupation. It has always used a process to have some form of legitimacy and legality to justify the outcome or its presence within Ambazonia. And so too was the fake referendum of 1972 that dismantled the very La Constitution Fédérale which they imposed in 1961. And I think every time that Cameroon has wanted to institutionalize an illegality, it has used the due process. And when I said I'm excited is because in the past 5 years, we have denied Cameroon every opportunity to use any local process to legalize its illegality, or at least to celebrate those it had institutionalized before the past 5 years. That's 11th of February, 20th of May. We have stopped it. You cannot celebrate days that emerge out of a conception of manipulation. And you will not institutionalize new days or dates for the continuous celebration of your manipulation. We've rejected any of its so-called domestic approaches to resolving the conflict between Cameroon and Ambazonia. We have rejected any of its so-called committee, commission, or whatever it has attempted in the past 4.5 years. And this is thanks to one of the greatest innovations which we have introduced. And as you have said, after the reasonable period that was declared over, I think, from the London Community in 1995, we moved from the situation of fighting to amend the colonial state and to integrate ourselves in to owning our own independence. The innovation which has come to stay, which we started in 1995 with putting in place the Southern Cameroons Youth League, is to have been able to understand how has it been possible that a fully independent state with its own government, its own economic institutions, its own system, would simply be overthrown by another country which you have rightly described as lacking in stability and unity. How has it been possible? And it has been due to the absence of defense force within Amazonia to defend our own institutions, our own independence. And it's critical as we talk about the 20th of May for Ambazonians to understand these critical ingredients that have made us susceptible to Cameroon's manipulation and colonialism. That of what you've written in the book, too much trusting, that we trusted both leadership within Ambazonia, and we trusted Cameroon. That blind trust has been our undoing. And
indeed,
yes, and in terms of Ambazonian leadership, I believe strongly that without a vibrant, questioning and interrogative civil society that question the actions of leaders, the population can easily be manipulated into a quagmire. And I think we have been able to change that perception within the Ambazonian struggle. And as you rightly said also, it's tempting. But how do you explain that when Cameroon always talked about unity, it never meant unity within Cameroon? That was
never.
Totally
never.
You had the Guru axis, you had the Northeast, you had the Bami Basas. You know, that
yes.
Was, yeah, they were just stitched together, you know, through a kind of a political system that sustained that the three components by the use of force. Unity for Cameroon has always been, you know, a camouflage for the annexation of Ambazonia.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think this is a lesson we must take seriously. But one last thing before you take over is this: by denying Cameroon the opportunity. I remember a couple of days when the chairman of the War Council, Ben, put out a statement and declaring 20th of May a day of resistance. We were discussing in the background what should happen if Cameroon renege on its usual celebratory mood. We knew, we anticipated that the humiliation that we have given Cameroon in the past 4.5 years, being unable to hold any election in Ambazonia, being unable to celebrate any of its illegal date, has fundamentally damaged Cameroon's claim of the power of governance over Ambazonia. This is very damaging, even more than the armed resistance itself. You know, and I think Ambazonians must take this seriously, that denial to Cameroon of the opportunity in our own land to celebrate a contraption, you know, and to legitimize a fraud that has cost us our lives and opportunities for millions of our people, is something that is very critical for the defense of our own independence. And in the coming days, we're looking forward to our people engaging in resistance and making it known to Cameroon that it's over. Neither the historical dates which you instituted illegally, nor any perception of the institution of another illegality through some domestic processes of attempts to resolve the conflict will ever again be tolerated by the Ambazonian people.
Yeah, I think you are very right. The point that needs to be emphasized, highlighted, and sidelighted here is something has happened which has taken French Cameroon completely unawares. They have believed so much in fraud, in lies, in corruption, and in bribery that, as far as they were concerned, they had bribed and corrupted the so-called Anglophones. And they were now content and sitting pretty. And that's why they were able to do the things they did in 2014, 15, and 16, you know. But all of a sudden, this whole thing has blown up into their face. And this is something they're asking themselves. because they had imagined that these liberation fighters, these are children who never knew the Southern Cameroons. They never knew Southern Cameroons. And as far as French Cameroon was concerned, it was a done deal. After the older generation had been taken care of, either through imprisonment, killing, or bribery and corruption, then it's a done deal. Nobody's ever going to challenge them anymore. But the fact that the youths, Ambazonian children, have risen up has come to them like a shock. This is something they have never bargained with at all. How and where do these young people have these ideas? They're standing up to them and they're saying the kind of thing they're saying. This is our homeland. You will not take an inch of it. You'll be living in fraud. You have been stealing from us, spoliation of our natural resources. It shall never happen again. You must just pack and go. Now, if this was something being done by the older generation, they would say, well, these are people who have been tainted by the Southern Cameroons or whatever thing, that period and so on. But these are people, these are young men. And many of them, very well educated, university graduates. And some of them have even gone to that Ayaba place they have seen. So they can compare, they know. And I've always told people that one of the biggest mistakes French Cameroon made, and is still making, was never to have made French Cameroon attractive to the people of the Southern Cameroon. Up to today, if you ask anybody, they've not made anything attractive. Why would anybody exchange to go to French Cameroon? There's nothing there that attracts anybody. And they have not done and will never ever do anything that will attract any person, even apart from us. They can never attract Equatorial Guinea, for example. Can never attract Gabon, for example. Central African Republic or Chad. No. If they had been a thinking people, what they would have done right from the beginning is to make the place attractive. Oh, you have your autonomy, no problem. Road networks, all of these things, scholarship here, this, everything, and so on and so forth. People would have compared and said, well, we're having a good deal here. But we never had a good deal. And so when everybody looks back at this, just yesterday, somebody was circulating a picture of just the stretch of road, Medamquet there. The buses, everybody got stuck, cannot go anywhere. This is 2021. This is incredible. 2021. And they say, why would anybody want Yaoundé, for God's sake? So it has been, and our youths understand this very, very well. They didn't need to, this is not rocket science for them to understand that their destiny, their interest doesn't lie with French Cameroon. In fact, the question people keep on asking, oh God, what type of a curse did he put on us? How on earth did you come together with these people? People have been asking me that question. And I said, as the Almighty God, frankly, I do not know. And this question, everything French Cameroon people do confirms this. And people keep on asking. There's absolutely nothing at all, nothing that attracts or can possibly make anybody to be with French Cameroon. No, nothing. You just mentioned. Let me just you just mentioned this thing about they following due processes. No, they never follow any due process. All fraud. Even the 20th May thing is all fraud throughout, all the way from so-called election, the statistics, the figure they gave out, even legally. Some people who don't understand law, don't know anything about law, some enablers, some fraud. They will tell you that it was legal. When you ask them how was it legal, they start telling you, oh, Ahijo told Foncha this, Foncha told Ahijo this, or told Mona. That is how it become legal. Oh, so from Mona, they went to campaign and all that and so on and so forth. That is it. Oh, Ahijo called Mona or told Foncha and told him that he was going to organize election and referendum and so on, all of this. So for that person, as far as he was concerned, that was all okay. I mean, I have never seen that kind of shallow thinking and shallow reasoning, you know. But these are people who pass for some experts in some fields and so on. Yeah, but we'll get more into some of these issues. Yeah, and I'll tell you. But just to tell you that one thing, and people seem to organize, neither in the four legislatures of the Federation, four legislatures, remember the two houses, the House of Assembly and the House of Chiefs in Boya, the House of Assembly in French Cameroon, and the federal government. So in neither of these four legislatures, nor even the federal government, or even the government of the two constitutive states, was there ever any resolution that was adopted anywhere expressing a desire that we want to get rid of federalism. Not even in the CNU, Party Unique, political bureau. There was never any such discussion. Nowhere expressing a view that we have then looked at this and discussed it and come to a conclusion that federalism must go. So there was no public, governmental, ministerial, parliamentary, or party debate on the issue of abolishing the federation. Nowhere. So how can anybody come and tell you and convince anybody that this was properly done? When Ahijo himself, when he went to the assembly, he said, "J'ai décidé de mettre fin à la fédération." He didn't say that through advisement. He said he has decided. The referendum that came was the usual despotic mechanism that I used to validate, in between quotes, a decision which had already been taken. So people who come and say, oh, the abolition was as a consequence of the referendum, it's a big lie. Ahijo had done that. And on that day, 8th of May, when Ahijo made that speech in Yaoundé, the House of Assembly in Boya didn't even have the guts to even meet to say, okay, let's dispose of pending business and formally dissolve the House of Assembly in Boya. Even the so-called Federal Assembly Yaoundé, nobody had the courage even to say, let's meet and formally dissolve this assembly, National Assembly, and so on. As soon as Ahijo made that speech, everybody just escaped to their villages. That was it. That was it. And next thing was, Ahijo came out, said there's a referendum. Even election organized within 2 weeks, which normal election organized within 2 weeks, and then you proclaim election. And I remember distinctly, the first result that came from Far Acquire 100%. And when they computed the result, they told us that Ahijo won by 99.99%. It's so ridiculous, and it's so shameful. That if you look at the figures that they gave, and they tell you that 70% of the population of West Cameroon voted yes. 70%. That would mean that nearly every adult in the Southern Cameroons, and possibly a number of children, the old and the infirm, and mad, all of them voted. I mean, this is the figure they themselves give. I'm not inventing anything. It's 70%. But then they said, for East Cameroon, they said, oh, only 50%. So it shows that West Cameroon was much more eager to give themselves to be annexed than East Cameroon were prepared to absorb them. That's all big one fraud. But later on, I'll show you the population figures, which French Cameroon has been playing round and round each year. They change. Within 2 years, they say there are 10 billion. Next year, they say there are 5. Next year, they say there are 15. Always like that. There's never been any regular census in French Cameroon, even the days of the French. Never. These are just exaggerated estimates they make and they put out. And when they put out, they hand over to you and they take and they say the population. Tell me whenever they've ever had a census. Bia's tiny, small, what they call that place, the south there. You know, in Ahijo's time, there were 200 or 300,000 people. When Bia came, they became 2 million. Now I think there are 5 million already. Because census is used for political and economic reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Prof, I think you've said a couple of interesting things which should be of interest to our people. And it's the rhetorical question you ask. How the hell did we find ourselves with these people? How the hell did you find ourselves with these people? It's a question I have been asking myself. And I've said this repeatedly. You see, if you are occupied by maybe even South Africa, or if you are occupied, yes,
so country of substance, you say, okay, perhaps.
and most importantly, Prof, most importantly, is what you've also said, and I've said this in different ways. For close to 60 years, they manipulated us to the level where Ambazonians denied their identity.
Yep.
Ambazonians could walk, a Cameroonian could walk into a room full of Ambazonians and automatically cause all the Ambazonians to begin to speak in French.
Yeah.
An Ambazonian could change his or her name to a French name to be accepted. That is the level to which Cameroon indoctrinated and manipulated our people and developed the arrogant confidence that it was a done deal. And as you have said, and rightfully too, they are shocked. They are shocked. And that's why they are making one mistake to the other. Listen, this is, you talk about attraction. Building a model that is attractive even to your enemy. Remember, and I've said repeatedly, I have been so opposed to the French that French was the only subject I never ever took. Never ever spoke French. The first time I really spoke French was when I was in Germany, because I was locked up within the asylum regime with Togolese, Congolese, and others. Yes, that's the first time, because of the arrogance with which the French thought we were obligated to speak their language without any reciprocation on like incentives. Now, but this is important. I come from the school that believes that the only way you can have your ideals and ideas, to be accepted or to overcome opposition is to make yours to be a better model than existing models. How is it possible that a country like Cameroon, so backward politically, economically, culturally, educationally, should oblige Ambazonians to accept it as a superior entity within the context of a single nation? But there are facts in history which should remind us that each time we have been given the alternative, Ambazonians have run away from Cameroon. I became one of the first students who gained direct entry into the University of Buea. The moment the possibility existed for Ambazonians to leave Yaoundé into Buea, they moved in their thousands. There were Ambazonians who abandoned their education within that quagmire political system just to come back into theirs. And I think one of the reasons why Cameroon has failed as a state is not only because you cannot dismantle federalism to be taken over by a unitary state. And as you've said rightfully, there is no historical precedent where you think you dismantle a federal, two persons mutual coexistence, and you replace it with a centralized political oppressive system that denied them the very opportunities that they had under the federalism. and that every federalism that has collapsed or dismantled has ended up either in a chaotic breakdown of the state. You had former Yugoslavia, you had other the USSR, and all those stitched together and named anyhow. The one that you can see as a model that, you know, can even be something that evolves towards more decentralization is like, you know, the United Kingdom. And despite the devolution of powers, you know, there are still people who believe that identity, nationalism, control, and determination of your economic and political future is more. Now, there is something to highlight, and which is central to what you have put forward. Cameroon is so stupid. I have never seen a stupid country in my entire life. And if there is one thing that is motivating Ambazonians to fight, is that you cannot allow yourself to be enslaved by people who are far lesser than you in every aspect of your existence. You cannot.
Correct.
You basically cannot accept that, you know, a people that you give them political asylum, a people that you are feeding them economically, coming from your own territory, and their lead protagonist in that occupation is somebody like a Tanganji. Is somebody like a Tanganji. The fundamental error of the Cameroon state is its arrogance and the belief that continuous perpetuation of a manipulative historical creation is somehow going to be accepted by any Ambazonian. Secondly, Cameroon is a weak state as far as military is concerned. We are still around here because, you know, we are in a unique liberation struggle. If we were in the times of the 60s, where liberation struggles across different countries collaborated against existing colonial entities, we would have reached the border of Equatorial of Gabon. We would have overrun Cameroon long ago.
That's right.
So, yeah, no, we would have overrun Cameroon long ago. They are weak. They are stupid. They are arrogant. They have nothing to offer. They are no model that Ambazonians should ever submit themselves. And I think this conversation, as you have said, is relevant so that our people know the mechanism through which Cameroon has instituted dates that it has continuously celebrated and denied itself to even celebrate dates of relevance to its own history. This is how stupid a country is. That, from what you said, how would you deny yourself full sovereignty, control of territory, to mortgage that into a federal system where you had less control? And why will you deny yourself the right to celebrate a day of nationalism, a day of pride like the 1st of January 1960, that you gain independence? For a conception like 11 February and a conception like the 20th of May. This is no country that we should have as a neighbor, let alone a country that should be able to determine the kinds of institutions that exist in our own country. It's a country to be pushed as far as possible off our own neighborhood, and I think that I'm very grateful that we are around, you know, to see this evolution take place.
These are some of the puzzles, and I've had occasion to ask people, some French Cameroon colleagues, I said, why do you guys subscribe to this fraud of 20th May? You said you achieved independence from France, although the French themselves are on record as saying what they did was to give French Cameroon l'indépendance fictive. And the French still maintain it because French Cameroon is virtually a French vassal state, you know, controlled by France in every respect. Because if it was independent And if he has sovereignty, as he keeps on proclaiming every day, why would you give away that very critical date where you become master of your own destiny for some fraud concocted by some individual acting at the behest of the French? It's something which is these are some of the many things which puzzle anybody about French Cameroon, and that we ask the same question, and French Cameroon always says it has intellectuals. How would they have accepted this? Like some collective brainwashing that took place, and even up to now, as we talk now, they have the parrot, the propaganda machine, which they call CRTV, is still churning out that deception. And people are buying that deception and claiming that 20th May is a national day. When you ask them, why is it a national day? They cannot explain. They will tell you it's reunification. And you ask them, what reunification are you talking about? Oh, on 11th of February, people of the Southern Cameroons voted for reunification with French Cameroon. And I said, could you reproduce for me that UN question they asked? Where did you find reunification there? I've not found it. I've searched and said there's no such thing. There was no such option as reunification. So they said that was reunification, and so the 20th May was unification. Oh, I mean, you see, they keep on turning things around, and they call it national unity. Then I asked them, let us take, you know, you don't believe in that, but let us say tomorrow, and I know it's going to happen, Ambazonia is no longer part of you. You don't have any connection at all. Since you say it's your national day, will you continue to celebrate it? Then it gets stuck, because you cannot say yes or continue to celebrate it, because it will be meaningless at that particular point, you see. And this will show these people how they can collectively get into, even those of them who are educated, you know, they buy this story. And I'm aware that a number of them have come out in the open and said this whole thing was a whole fraud. But that outing has just been episodic. It has not been a continuing thing. So French Cameroon, or Cameroon, has been like that. And it has been a very, very curious entity to speak. And for many people who don't know, Cameroon is an amalgam. Even during the time of French colonial rule, there were two. The northern part was completely different from the southern part. The Muslim, what they call Muslim North, and the Christian South. And our people who don't know, the French, even before, just before independence for French Cameroon, contemplated cutting off the north and incorporating it with Chad. Interesting. That was on the cards. They discussed it seriously. Discussed it. And at some point, they gave it up. Then somebody said, why don't you give it to Nigeria? Because these were the same people. Interesting as it was, you know. And then somebody said, one Frenchman said, we cannot do that. You know what the British did to us at Fashoda? If anybody who read history know how the British beat the French at Fashoda. Fashoda is in Sudan there, and so on. And they said, no, we can't do the British this favor. No. We better take this thing and give it to Chad. Then the argument went on and on and on. And they said, well, let's just leave it as it is. But we don't trust the southern people. They're the ones who started the Maquis and so on. So let's get Ahijo. He's a good boy. We can control him and make him in charge of Cameroon. And that's how Andre Marimbi was kicked out. And Ahijo took over as premier of French Cameroon, and the rest is history. But one thing which Ahijo did, I keep on saying this, when a country lives in deception and fraud, it eventually catches up with them. When Ahidjo, in the end, had this fight with his self-appointed successor, Biya was never elected by anybody. Biya had never won even a Cartier election anywhere. Never. And that's the first time in history where you find a successor head of state appointed by decree. No, it was not even by decree, by radio announcement. Ahidjo simply made a radio announcement. I'm leaving. And your next president is XYZ. And he became president, just like that. And when they started fighting, and this fellow got Ahidjo sentenced to in absentia to death and all this. In faraway France and subsequently Senegal, Ahidjo described Biya as a fraud. He said, this man is a fraud, he's a dishonest. I knew very well that this man has no original ideas. I knew very well that this man cannot work independently. He has to be guided, to be told to do this, and so on. But one thing which I didn't know, and which I didn't have any security report about, is that this man was a fraud and a person who pretended a lot. And he confessed, and it was his last thing. He said, because they generally asked, what would you consider one of your big decisions? He said, one of his greatest mistakes, which he made, was never to have trusted what he called Anglophones. But he was saying that, selling after the market. Well, you never trusted Anglophones, you're out to destroy them, and so on and so forth. And as I say, we're having this conversation and saying these things just for the historical record. Because we're no longer there anyway. We've left. We're already on our journey. And all we need to do is, in the nearest future, is to come back onto our own after we've expelled the colonial oppressor. So, this Cameroon we're talking about, if you read their history, I want to read their history, quite interesting, very convoluted. But it shows how deceptive, how deceitful they are, all of the political leadership and the things they do, and lack of principles and honesty. This is the whole thing. How can you run a country when there is no principle at all? For them, everything has to be by manipulation and the use of force. That's how it has been in their life and so on. And no country can ever thrive in that way. And that is why French Cameroon, or Cameroon as it is, the future is very bleak for that country. If it survives as an entity, it will be very, very lucky. Because the internal divisions are very, very deep and historical. And right now, you have a tribal oligarchy which is in power and sustained by a tribal military that passes for a national military. This is not good for the country at all. It isn't. It's no good. It's no good. And the sooner the rest of that country stand up and assert themselves, because they too have a right of internal self-determination, and ensure that they have a proper system in place and a properly elected government, I don't see them going any far, frankly. France will not come to foot the bill for them. France will not come to do, because right now France itself is in big shit, as I can say it. When the military of a developed country, like the one in France, stands up and tell the president, we'll make a coup d'etat if you don't change your ways. It didn't say it once, they didn't say it twice. Then it has become very, very serious. And the people of France, their eyes are now open. Thanks again to the internet. They now know what the government are doing. They now know that they're living on borrowed time, borrowed money, stolen from Africa, and things are beginning to change. So if French Cameroon doesn't change, I'm not too sure what the future holds for them. It may well go into pieces. You know, the Betty agenda which we knew that they and anybody can see what they've been planning, that they will not give power to the North. This want the power back. And because they say if they give power back, then they were going to oppress them. And as a contingency plan, they developed their area and assert their own independence. At first, they thought they could do that in connection with Equatorial Guinea. But Equatorial Guinea has since signified to them they were not interested at all and has even built a wall. Many people don't know it, between itself and French Cameroon. So we don't want you guys here. So it's as bad as that.
Yeah, I think it's too late. It's too late for Cameroon to make any change. And I think it's our strategic military objective to make sure that Cameroon is disintegrated. Because one of the biggest problems that independent countries face is the country that they have moved out from, using its superior economic and political stability during the period of transition to make new leaders within the independent state. There is a great danger, secondly, that the survival of Cameroon could create within Ambazonia leadership with the same Cameroon mentality and perpetuate the Cameroon system within our country. Apart from putting in place institutions and rules that should clearly depart from what we have experienced in the past 60 years. So, systems that reflect our own realities. We must make sure that Cameroon is in turmoil for a long time and should be looking up to Ambazonia for stability and to recreate the new Cameroon in the image of the new Ambazonia. Because one thing is certain, and you have spoken about it. France cannot survive as a colonial patron. It can no longer survive as a colonial patron because the social media has exposed France a lot. As I have said repeatedly, France is not a country that believes in the existence of minorities. And so it has not created systems within its own constitutional order to protect the growing minorities that exist within France. And that has been a great source of tension in France as a whole. That internal tension with a corrupt political leadership that has survived in corruption, the perpetuation of violence within the continent of Africa is going out of business. And it's to our advantage to make sure we begin to articulate strongly publicly a system that we are, and that such a system must be a great departure from what we are fighting against. Now, one of the greatest problem Cameroon is going to face is these axes that exist within its own country, that has been ruled by both the tribal army and the tribal political system, are also warming up for their day. They yes. Believe rightly or wrongly, that some of them think like the northern axis still believe in entitlement, that they were entitled to power by what I describe as a fraud and a pretentious southerner, and that in the situation that there is instability, it will give them the opportunity to rewrite the wrongs that the southern provinces have done onto them. And it is to the best interest of Ambazonian to promote that division within Cameroon to create a kind of instability that will probably give the opportunity for the creation of a new Cameroon state. But Prof, I would like you to address something which I think you have more depth of knowledge in. You started talking about it, the notion of unification, reunification is born out of a perception of the existence of a legal state called Cameroon, dismembered by war or any kind of schism. And as far as I know, you've written about this both in your academic work, in your submission to Banjul, the fact that there has been no entity called Cameroon as a state recognized under international law that involves Ambazonia or any other historical component of what the Germans call Cameroon. Secondly, you've also written and submitted about the fact that I think the conception of the German Cameroon as far as 1884, and Ambazonia only became part of that German Cameroon in 1887. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Very correct. Yeah, you see, this is again another distortion which some of the famous historians in Cameroon they decide to keep silent about and to hide it. The fact is that way back as 1843, Ambazonia was connected to the British, because that's when the British started these anti-slavery campaigns along the Bimbia coast, Victoria around there, and so on. And so you had those connections. And from that anti-slavery activity, they started concluding a lot of treaties. And I counted them amazingly, over 20 of those treaties, which were concluded with the coastal chiefs, the British. And of course, then Victoria was taken over and became a British colony by Basel Mission, and was named Victoria after Queen Victoria. And so the whole area was British. And according to the colonial theory in those days, once a colonial power lands at the coast of a country, all the hinterland, because it was known as the hinterland theory, became part of the territory of that colonial power. And so the coast of Ambazonia and the hinterland of Ambazonia became the British territory. And it was like that. It stayed on that way until 1887, mid-1887. Again, because these things, what the colonial power used to do is they transfer territories in exchange for something and so on. So the British now said, well, okay, we are prepared to leave this area for you because we already have a big colony of Nigeria there, protectorate of Nigeria, and negotiated with the Germans. So the Germans took over. But it was not like an easy takeover. Although it was 1887, the Germans were only able, we all know, that it was about 1889 that the Germans were able to fight the wars with the Bakuris in Boya, and slowly, through a gradual process, were pushing in the hinterland. Because at the Berlin Conference, the new rule was no longer the hinterland theory. The new rule now was effective occupation. No colonial power could claim a territory until it has shown that it had effectively occupied it. So the Germans had to fight every inch of their way, from Victoria, Boya, going up to Kumba, all those places, Mamfe, going through to Bali, Mangkong, and so on. And sometimes they will use some of the explorers who go to reconnoiter the place before the Schuss troop came along, and so on. So, although they were handed over in 1887, the effective German peaceful occupation of what we call Ambazonia today did not last for more than a few years. And by 1914, early 1914, the very first month of the World War, the Germans were kicked out. And the German colony of Cameroon and Cameroon were liquidated at the treaties of Versailles, it ceased to exist. There was no such thing anymore as a German territory. Of course, the physical territory was there, but that physical territory now was made available to different powers, and that's why legally the British took one side and the French took one side. And for the history, the British were very generous with the French. Much of the German Cameroon was militarily conquered by the British. So from Mora coming down, right up to Garua, even the Yaoundé itself. Before the French and the Belgians could get there, the British were there, and of course Douala was taken by the British. So if the British wanted, they could still have taken the whole territory they wanted, or at least half of it, or 3/4 of it. But the British view was that, well, we already have Nigeria. Again, Nigeria has been plaguing us a lot. Nigeria already is too big for us and so on. So all we needed was a small strip of territory to have a fine border there of Nigeria. So we're not interested in having a big territory. And that's why the British gave up. In Douala itself, which the British it was the British that bombarded Douala and took it over. They could well have kept it if they wanted. Especially as in colonial times, the Douala chiefs had petitioned the British Queen several times to take over their territory. And the British had declined. The British could have this opportunity, they could have taken it. But again, they declined, they said they're not going to take it. So our period of being part of German Cameroon, less than 30 years, in fact, just about 25 years. Just enough time for them to build the slush in Boyade. But there was no effective administration in the hinterland of Ambazonia. Most of those places. So when you hear anybody tells you that this Cameroon is built on the foundation of that German Cameroon, it's false because it's not true. German Cameroon ceased to exist and was never resuscitated. The French Cameroon, or what they call Cameroon today, takes its own life from the mandate system, which granted France a mandate to take the Maritime territory. In other words, you are talking from 1922, the political force that was set in motion at that time. So that's where it derives its position as a political entity. But of course, like every historical thing, you can go back to past history and go back to see. Like I was just listening yesterday to somebody who was saying that the Douala people came from the Congo. They were Congolese. The man even said, these people are Congolese, they came from the Congo. So if you want to extend that kind of a theory, you might say, okay, we'll go and grab the Congo. But no, the theory that French Cameroon or Cameroon is successor to German Cameroon is laughable and doesn't make any legal sense. It's like Italy now saying that is successor to Roman Empire. That Roman Empire, which traced right up to the whole of Europe and Britain. So that is successor now, and all of that will be part of Italy. It's as stupid as that. But they say these things, and I'm surprised that nobody even ever challenges them to say those things. And the ordinary people just swallow it, put beg and sinker. No. French Cameroon derived is as a territory, as a political entity from 1922 under French regime. And the French ruled them until the French gave them independence. And it became a successor, not to German Cameroon, but to French Cameroon. In the law of state succession, a new state succeeds to the immediate predecessing state, not some remote state. Because if you were to do that, we'll go back to right from ancient times and start saying, okay, in that case, Nigeria will claim the whole of northern Cameroon because the Nigerians, Osman Danfodo's son, Adama, had conquered, come right down to what we call to Adamawa. So Nigeria could claim all of that as part of Nigeria, if you have to take it that way. But no, it's really silly. And I don't understand how people don't see it this way. So that is how French Cameroon is. We are not part of that. We've never had any connection with France. Even today, we've never had. French Cameroon, we never had any ties with French Cameroon until this thing about after the plebiscite in October 61. You didn't mention a point. Of course, because of our generosity, we gave these people asylum. They escaped and came there. And we didn't just give them asylum. We gave them jobs. We educated them. And they grew up there. And some of them married there. That's how generous we are. So anybody who is now trying to say that using the concept of reunification, that's why the whole concept of reunification doesn't make any sense at all. It makes more sense to talk of unification or unity, because A and D can unite even if they had no connection before. The Chinese can decide to unite with Americans, but it doesn't mean that they had any common destiny anywhere at any time. So that is what it is. Unification or unity, but not reunification. Because reunification, and that's the thing they're roping us in. When they say reunification, they're trying to inculcate in people's mind that we were one before. Yes. And like they say, oh, it's a colonial master that came and separated us. So all our civilians are coming back together. How stupid, how silly it is. You know, people we never even knew, had no connection with at all. Even during the German times. Let them tell us the common this common assembly were all sitting in during the German times. Or there's one government, who were all parties of that government. Let them tell us. There was none. It did not exist. So they can't talk of oneness even. So I've always challenged the concept of reunification, but which we know and I know they are simply instrumentalizing it and using it for the purpose which that's part of their own strategy to make sure they get those of us who are foolish enough to believe that that's what it is. And I hear it, some of our people keep on parroting it. As I like you rightly remarked, a lot of our people, I've never seen a people who are so whimsical. They can't accept their own identity.
Yeah.
The colonial authority come and tells you, oh, you're Southern Cameroon, say yes, sir. Some other one come and say, you are West Cameroon. You say yes, sir. Next day you say, no, you are Northwest South. Oh, yes, sir. The next Northwest South region, yes, sir. Now they're saying you are Noso, you say, oh, yes, sir. And you hear people that call themselves, I'm a Northwesterner, I'm a Southwesterner. They're even saying I'm a Noso. I mean, sometimes these things I laugh and I just cannot understand where these people are coming from. You know? Yeah. Especially in a world where people are talking about identity issues which are so important, try to assert themselves. No, some people don't, you know, which is such a shame. But of course, as we said, the youth now have come along and turned the tables around. Things are changing. And even things like the name structure. People became no longer Solomon Tandem Mona, which we know, became Mona Solomon Tandem. So even our order of them were changed. You know, and so our people, no longer Peter, became Pierre. Our Mary is no longer Mary, is Marie. Oh my goodness!
You have a Mankom girl. You call her Ngum, and she is very unhappy. Yes,
happy.
Yes, that you are. You know, you try to call her Marie.
Yeah. You see, yes. I don't know. In some instances, maybe in some instances there are survival techniques. You know that if you come out your true names and so on, you'll be shunted.
No. It's not survival technique. It's an acceptability technique.
I tell you. Oh yes, of course, yes, to be accepted, yes.
Yes, it's simply it holds true to some of us who are out here, and sometimes we listen to Biafrans who are out here, and we are you find a Biafran who has a child with a Norwegian or with a German, and you get the name is Ijoma, you know, and you find a black child born with a German called Klaus. You are wondering what the hell is it possible that a man is called Klaus?
No, oh my goodness, identity, yeah.
So, La République Like within the age of C, I try to address everyone by their surname. You know,
Yes.
So you call by their surname because
Yes.
it tells you where they come from. It's an
That's right.
part of their identity, and it holds
That's
true
right.
to with music, Prof. Imagine that somebody sang a music in Mancon, in Bakwarian, in Meta 20 years ago. It sounded funny. It sounded funny,
Indeed,
honestly.
indeed. And nobody want to listen to it. They want Makosa.
Listen to it. They call it country music.
Exactly.
Because the perception of Makosa, you know, even if it is sung in Douala that we do not understand, it's so
Understand?
Yes.
Yes.
And I am so happy that places like Kwakwa, places like Kugwe, you know,
Yes.
places like Alabukam, that made no sense. Oh God, freedom is good. Freedom is good.
It's good. And our music is now coming out. Our musicians are now singing and churning out our music. It makes a whole difference.
Yes, yes. I am so happy because one of the greatest things about colonialism is about mental colonialism. The moment the colonial power decides that the amount of information you have, your identity is going to be seen through their own image or is going to be constructed by them. Even if you free the land, you still remain a tool of their instrumentalization. And I am glad that Ambazonians are accepting their Ambazonianness. Ambazonians are able to call, you hear names of our generals. General No. You hear names, yes, big number. You hear all those names. They are becoming trendy. We are creating a new vocabulary, you know. And if you read, I will forward you the Norwegian report. I will forward you the Norwegian report on the Ambazonian struggle. You'll be shocked. They have names inside like black and nameless. They have all of the things that we have created. Amba is not a joke, bro.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we have laid the foundation. I think you and those before us, and we are very grateful. And that's why I always tell those who are coming in today that they should not and this is the big mistake. Today I was reading the letter we sent to Katu. It was sent by the then deputy leader of the AGOC, who is now in jail. I found the letter when I was trying to look at the minutes of the foundation of the AGOC. I found the letter he sent to these to teachers and to lawyers, and appealing to them that even though we are grateful that you are struggling to protect our system of education, our common law tradition, protecting these things within the context of a free Ambazonia is the insurance policy you can give the next generation. And you remember, I think you and myself, we worked hard to get the meeting in Boya, I think it's 2016, to bring all of these people together so that we depart from the notion of trying to reform the colonial state to that of really asserting our independence. Why I'm saying this is because before I became a member of what you created in 1990, the SDF, before we ever came up, you know, the Abemukongs and the others had laid the foundation. The biggest mistake we did, when we came in, we thought, instead of building on what others had created, we simply, you know, erased that history and started all over again. And it has been a big problem within the Ambazonian struggle. And why I'm saying this is because what exists today should and can never be undone. The foundation of our current consciousness, which you people laid, which we have projected should never again be shelved aside for any expedient processes, to stabilize without. And this should be a lesson for us. And I think one of the biggest things that has bedeviled our generation, which social media has helped to solve a bit, is the basket of knowledge. Yeah, Cameroon has wallowed in deception, revisionism, and it has used familiar faces amongst us, to perpetuate and propagate the deception. The amount of input in terms of knowledge that you have will determine how resilient you can be in a struggle for liberation. Because a struggle for liberation is very enduring. It's very difficult.
It is.
Yes, and endurance is only based on a foundation of knowledge that what you are fighting, shedding your blood for, and dying for is not some contraption based in deception. And I think the social media has given us an opportunity to continuously have this discussion that we are having today, so that Amazonians should know, number one, there has never been any historical entity called Cameroon as a legal state accepted on international law as such, with borders fixed, including Amazonia. It has never existed. And as you talked about the laws of the creation of states, it's dissolution. The concept of nation state is a young one from the Westphalian notion of concept of nation state. The only time Cameroon has existed as a state was from 1st January 1960. And it didn't still include Ambazonia. And the notion of reunification, based on the assumption that we were first together, is also what you describe as a fraud that Ambazonians should never buy. And even that of unification as born out of the 1972 maneuver is also a fraud. You cannot build a nation on a foundation of fraud and deception. It will crumble like, anything that has existed before us, more powerful than Cameroon has been. And I'm glad that we are having this conversation to let our people really have a stronger foundation upon which, they continue to resist and die.
Yeah, our people should know we have our country well secured, international boundary treaties, unmovable, very, very clear, and in the Bakassi case, what has simply just happened is we will not need to litigate that Nigerian boundary anymore because now the pillars have been planted, everything.
Exactly.
On the other side of French Cameroon, the pillars are there already. So we are on firm grounds. The only little things which I see we will need to tidy up there is a maritime boundary, one with French Cameroon and two with Equatorial Guinea. And then we'll be in good shape. So we are on firm grounds. We are on firm grounds. We are well poised to become one of the leading countries on the African continent. And I've told our people, and I keep on saying, this is time for our engineers to shine, for our geographers to shine. And somehow I have a feeling that the day after independence, our people are not likely to give us more than 5 years to show that all this suffering has been worthwhile. In other words, they would like to see the network of roads like the countries that have been there in Europe and America and so on, from Victoria to Nkambe, and railway connectivity from Victoria to Nkambe and the development of the ports. This is going to happen. And this is why right now we should start making those plans and laying everything on the ground. So when we get to Boya, we don't start scratching our head and say, okay, fine, let's figure out what. This thing would already have been figured out while we're out here in exile. So go down there, it's just a question of implementing and seeing how we get on. People have raised issues of money. Well, when we get to our bridge, we cross it. And I don't think accessing money to build infrastructure, road, railway, ports and so on will be going to be a problem. Not going to be a problem. That's going to be access. So these are the challenges that we have. We should probably look forward to the future and with confidence and the things we need to do. Our people want to see a difference from French Cameroon. God forbid that after independence we still inflict the agony the poor have suffering now on our people. So it must be a free people in every respect, freedom of movement. They have a choice, ride in their cars on a very good road, take the train if they want to take the train, go in any part of the country they want at their own convenience. You can be in Bamenda, you hop down to Victoria, it's just a question of a few hours, and hop back to Bamenda if you want to, and vice versa. It should be like that. And that's what independence is. And you choose where you want to live, in a comfortable home. If we have good road connectivity, anybody will stay in that village if they want to. I can stay in Osha and come and walk in Bamenda if I want to. It's just a matter of just less than an hour, a few minutes. So this is the ambition, the kind of thing we want for our future nation. That different possibilities. Fly in, fly out. Come by sea if they want to. Have boat rides leisurely from one end of the country to another. So I hope and I pray that our people are listening, and our scientists are listening, and our engineers are listening, our doctors and all our professionals, pharmacists, nurses, and so on. This is the challenge.
Chancellor Prof, I'm going to allow you as a biggest brother in the house. You will give the concluding statement. I will just I'll give my own statement, and you will as I said to you, you must make sure that we work extremely very hard to get this thing, so that you and the phone is still around. The Ongoji Dinka, he's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
must
hope,
arrange. I don't know. To go to Britain sometimes. I don't know when. With all the lockdown, I don't know.
Yeah, when we meet again there, we should be able to pay him a visit, and yes, listen to him, get his blessing somehow. But this is what is important for the reason why Ambazonia has failed itself has been the absence of an army to defend what what belongs to it. We should make no mistake. All of our intellectual argument, all of the treaties that give us the notion of statehood, all of the laws, natural and treaty that makes us a state will be totally irrelevant in the absence of the instruments of defense. And sometimes when I talk about defense, people feel like, it's just thinking about war. When you live in a neighborhood where you to build a kind of military that not only protect you against those hostiles, but to ensure that you can have the peaceful environment to develop your own potentials. And that's why, see, in the past 20 something years, we have argued strongly, and you are aware of this from the time we left the University of Boya, that Cameroon is a rapacious state that believes in arrogance, in war weapons. And the only time it's going to respect Ambazonia is when Ambazonia flexes its muscles and show Cameroon that we can match them based on arguments and ideas, but it can also match them based on firepower. And I am grateful that so far this idea has become a universal currency that every village, every block has bought into, and people are rising up within different places to defend their neighborhood against, the penchant of the colonial state. On the 29th, we are launching a major fundraiser to continuously provide for our people the instruments with which they can defend themselves. We have recognized in the past few months the fact that once our forces became lethal against Cameroon moving targets, they decided to entrench themselves